afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, broadcast on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida, on America's beautiful Space Coast. And today I have a special guest, Dr. Ileana Johnson Paugh, and welcome to the show, Ileana.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for having me again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you. Your shows are just a highlight of my week when we get a chance to talk. So you mentioned something before we started recording that you wanted to talk about and explain to us. And it was something I'm not familiar with, and it's called Geist?
It's called diced. D-I-C-E-D, diced, as in dicing vegetables.
Oh, diced. Okay.
Yes. Before we talked about immigration, I just wanted to mention this because it is the mechanics for world governance that have progressed to the point of publishing at the time when I was researching the fourth draft of a global constitution. And it is known as the Draft International Covenant on Environment and Development. And of course, the acronym is DICED, D-I-C-E-D, which is, that was the most recent version that I actually read and was submitted to the United Nations on September 22nd, 2010. It's described as being, and I quote here, written to control all development tied to the environment, the highest form of law for all human activity, end of quote. And this DICE contains 79 articles covering about 242 pages, which take the principles of UN Agenda 21 that we discussed before, the 17 principles, and place them into a legal central planning document which represents quote unquote global law. The source of this assault on liberty it's pretty much obviously all the globalists, and it is intended to supersede all constitutions of all nations, including that of the United States. And of course, it started under the aegis or the guidance of the International Council on Environmental Law in Bonn, Germany, as well as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which has offices in Gland, Switzerland, and Cambridge, UK. And this DICED is described, I won't go into it because obviously it's a very lengthy document, and I do have a chapter about it in my book. It is intended as quote unquote living document, which is basically how liberals describe our Constitution. One intended to be modified as methods of greater control and exploitation become available to them. They call it a blueprint that will be adopted by all members of the United Nations in order to achieve the socialist utopia founded upon sustainable development, and of course focusing on, quote, social and economic pillars, end of quote. So it is a really very dangerous document that subjugates all the nations on the planet of the globe under the guidance of the United Nations. And people just have no idea that this exists.
And I didn't realize it did either, because as I've been, as I've read your book, Agenda 21, and studied it, and I've also been reading Agenda 2030, reading their website and seeing what they say. I wasn't familiar with this, but this sounds like this is going to be the new world order, one world government constitution.
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And then that would replace our Constitution.
Exactly. It will replace the constitutions of all member states of the United Nations.
That that, I don't know the words for it. It's horrendous and it's repugnant and it's against our sovereignty.
Of course it is. It's against the sovereignty of all member nations, and which kind of brings me to one way to accomplish this is uh, to use social engineering, make massive moves of populations from third world nations into developed nations around the globe, which they've started doing. There are today over 258 million migrants living outside of the country of their birth. And some of them were not because they were able to flee or they were able to immigrate, because they have been literally moved either by wars, a very small percentage, but a high percentage now is being moved by dictates from the United Nations. And of course, the latest assault of this is through the Global Compact for Orderly and Peaceful Immigration. Well, I don't know if there's anything orderly or peaceful about it, because they have certainly disrupted life as we know it all over Europe, and there's big turmoil over there. So if you remember, after World War II, at the end of World War II, there were maybe 1 million or more people that from various countries that had been displaced because they were running away and they were caught in certain areas, not necessarily their countries, and they had to be dealt with and moved back to wherever they wanted to go. But this is not the case here. The United Nations and the UNICEF, with money from billionaires like George Soros, are moving these caravans from Central America to the United States, because we're more or less the last resistance to this massive movement of third world people who don't like our Constitution, who live by Sharia law, or they want to bring the countries where they came from and the way they live there. In other words, transform us into a banana republic. And so in 2016, September, the General Assembly of the United Nations decided to adopt the New York Declaration for Refugee and Migrants to develop a global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So they want to control this movement. And July 13 this year, 2018, the UN member states finalized the text for this global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, which is available in all the official languages of the UN. And of course, as we speak, yesterday and today, there has been a conference in Marrakesh, Morocco, which is called the Intergovernmental Conference to Adopt the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And as you know, several countries in Europe have decided not to sign this contract, this compact, even though they say it's non-binding. Well, it was the same thing with Agenda 21 in 1992, when then President Bush 41 had signed us onto in Rio de Janeiro. It was non-binding, but it has spread all over the world and has been adopted by every government level in our country and everywhere else of the 172 signatory countries. So
Ileana, what you're saying is that there are more than 250 million people who are been displaced or are moved somehow. And what this sounds like, and I think I mentioned this before, this is a mass distribution of population. Now, we know that the socialists want to have a mass distribution of wealth, and this is just another part of it by distributing the population of the country, because as I've read a lot about Europe and the refugees and the migrants moving in and taking over countries like Germany and France and Sweden, This is real.
Of course it is. You see all this burning in Paris, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
part of it, the excuse is that, well, we're going to add more carbon taxes to your price of gasoline, which would make it like $7 a liter, um, or perhaps a gallon. I'm not sure, but um, it's um, it's more than that. It's all this uncheckered social engineering movement of migrants into the developed world, migrants that don't want to assimilate, and the liberals in those countries don't want them to assimilate. It's assimilation has become a dirty word, so they're okay with the fact that these people are building an enclave within the country. So their country within France or within Sweden and within Belgium or UK. And when you talk about smaller countries like Sweden, with a population of 9 million people who have less than one child per family, it's not easy. It's not hard to see how quickly they will be overcome by these third worlders who have 4 wives and numerous children. The average number of children per family is 8 point something. That's their birth rate, where most of European birth rate is below 1. Because their culture has deteriorated to such an extent, people don't get married, they don't value family, they don't value having children, so they live in sin. So, and they are allowing these alien cultures to take over their countries and destroy their countries.
Well, Ileana, as you're saying this, it reminds me, and I'm thinking going back to the 50s and the 60s of the last century. There's been the UN has been in place and been working up to this all this time, because what they've been doing is systematically trying to destroy the families in America and across the globe. So by destroying the families, this kind of fits in with you. What you're saying is populations having less than their native population birth growth is less than one child per family, where I think the demographics are, in order to sustain a population, the birth rate has to be about 2.1 children, I believe, on an average.
Yeah. That is correct. Well, all this global compact, this movement of population, is actually rooted in sustainable development of Agenda 2030. And they are actually saying so in their document. I downloaded their document, Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And one of the points, they actually say it, yeah, the Global Compact is rooted in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So they're not really hiding it. It says that migration contributes to positive development outcomes and to realizing the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially when it is properly managed. These people are not, there's nothing positive about this migration. It's all disruptive and destructive of the countries where it happens. And of course, during the previous administration in our own country, a lot of it was brought into this country in the dead of night, and they were inserted in highly conservative communities in order to destroy the culture.
And as you're saying this, I'm thinking the United States, and you know, we're talking about government by the people, but what you're saying is this is the government managing the people, and I think that's really totally in opposition to our Constitution.
Of course it is. And if you have time to read this document for Global Compact, it describes the 23 goals. They wanted to be people-centered. Nothing else mattered but the people that they're moving. It depends on international cooperation, but you saw if a country decided, not to join the compact or sign it. They were highly criticized and pressured. National sovereignty. Of course, you're not going to have national sovereignty anymore if the United Nations is dictating you to throw all your borders open to the flotsam and jetsam from the third world, who most of the time are illiterate in their own languages. They can't read and write, much less in our own, but yet once they come here, they vote. And guess where they're going to vote for? Whoever pays them more freebies or gives them more freebies. Then they also say that the Global Compact is based on the rule of law and due process. That is hardly true. It's based on human rights. Well, whose human rights? The rights of the people who are invading our sovereign nations, or the rights of the citizens of the sovereign nation? Obviously, it's not the rights of the citizens of the sovereign nations. It's also, the Global Compact is gender responsive. And of course, it talks about, or gives lip service, in my opinion, to the rights of women, men, girls, and boys, because you do know that most of these people who staff these committees at the United Nations on human rights are from countries that are the worst offenders on the planet in terms of not respecting human rights of their citizens, and particularly of women, who are considered half of a person. Then they also talk about being child sensitive, but when you have such a migration of mostly men and you have a few token children and women, they're going to be mistreated, and there will be sex trafficking and all of that in the process. So these people just want to rewrite how we live and how we do business and how we exist, and transform every sovereign country into a lackey, a vassal to the United Nations, which would become the government, the global government in essence. And do we want such a thing? I don't think so, but most people are very generous and they want to take these people in because they are economically, I guess, depressed, suppressed, whatever. But if that's the case, can we take all the billions on this globe who are economically dispossessed? This Global Compact talks about refugees as migration stock, S-T-O-C-K, as if they're cattle. Migration stock? Seriously? Well, by the definition that somebody has the right to migrate because they're economically deprived, then all the people from the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union and everywhere else should have been allowed to immigrate to the West, because they were definitely economically suppressed.
And that would apply to everybody in the Mideast. It would apply to everyone in Africa, and right. It would apply to everyone in Central America. And eventually then, those of us who are American citizens would then be economically depressed.
Yeah, because you only have so much wealth in the world. If you were, for example, and I'm speaking as an economist now, just in this country alone, if you were to do the bidding of liberals who say that the rich people don't pay their fair share. So if you were to confiscate every bit of wealth in this country, it would only last about 3 days. And then what are you going to do? Let's say you confiscate all the wealth on the planet, that would last maybe 6 to 7 days. And then what are you going to do? How are you going to feed and support all these people who become wards of various governments and live better than actual Americans who have paid into Social Security and have to live on a limited income once they retire? Whereas as soon as these migrants or refugees step in our country, they get every benefit you can possibly think of.
And I know you're right about this. And for those who don't know, Ileana has a PhD in economics, so I'm going to defer to you as far as the economical aspects of this issue. Now, the people in the UN, they have all these various departments, and they have people who are writing these articles and writing this, in a sense, this constitution or this governance. And we are paying for that. And I think I mentioned that in a previous interview that we did. The people in America are really paying for this, but the people throughout the world are going to, for some people, I guess this is going to be an advantage to them, or maybe not, because I don't know if I'm a citizen of another country, I don't know if I want to be governed and ruled and managed by the United Nations either.
Well, I don't think so. I think it's almost like having your home run by a total stranger you don't even know, who does not live in your country, and you just give them free rein to make all the decision for your household, for your family, for your food, for your health. Do we want that? I don't think so. But then we are one of the major supporters of the UN, and they've been doing all this stuff, through various organizations for a long, long time. For example, in 1922, in Vienna, they founded a pan-European a movement which actually aimed to create a new world order based on a federation of nations led by the United States. And that was the European integration would be just the first step in creating a world government. And you know that they've tried to integrate Europe into the EU for a long, long time, and they finally succeeded. Of course, when the fascism rose, during World War II, the movement was forced to dissolve, but it never went away. And there was a guy, and most people have never heard of him. His last name was Kalergi. He was a Count, Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi. His father was an Austrian diplomat, and he had some connections to the Byzantine family of Kalergis, and his mother was Japanese. But anyway, he wrote a book called Praktischer Idealismus, or Practical Idealism, and he explains in this book that the citizens of the future, and this is a direct quote, United States of Europe will not be the people of the old continent, but a new mixed breed, the products of thorough and widespread miscegenation, mixing races and ethnic groups. Well, and that's not, but the idea was that you want to create a multiracial population that could be subjected and run into one big empire, I guess, sort of like the Roman Empire tried to rule the world, and they succeeded for a little while. But he said that in order to achieve this, you had to abolish the right of nations to self-determination. So not having a border and not being in control of your government, that's doing away with your right of self-determination. But coming to the modern times, there's a prestigious prize that's awarded every 2 years by the Coudenhove-Kalergi Foundation to Europeans who have excelled in promoting this plan. Among those awarded with such a prize are you ready for this? Angela Merkel and Herman van Rompuy. And of course, they're both highly placed in the European Union, as you know. According to a report published in January 2000, I found this recently, by the Population Division of the United Nations in New York, under the title Immigration Replacement, a Solution to Declining and Aging Population, Europe will need to accept 159 million migrants by 2025. That's not that far away. 6 years, right? 6 or 7.
No, that is close. And, you know, I have a lot of friends from Europe especially England, and some of them come here to Florida and they spend the winters here and so forth. I get to know them very well. And some of my neighbors are from the UK. And what's happening is they're talking about how in the UK, and I'm thinking if this, I'm trying to draw the similarity between if this can happen in the UK, it can happen in the US. It's just that it's happening there a little bit sooner than it's happening here. But they're talking about all the migrants like from Poland who will come in and take low-paid jobs and displace their workers. And then the Muslim population has grown so much that now most of the cities in England are now governed by Muslim mayors, and that they have Sharia law areas are no-go zones, and just like they do in Paris. And we also have a few here in the United States, like Dearborn, Michigan, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where the police are not allowed to go into those areas because they are controlled by Sharia.
Yeah, it's very sad. And of course, this United Nations plan that I found that was published in 2000 is excused by the fact that there's a low birth rate in Europe. But that can be easily reversed with appropriate measures to support families. And I know it is easy to reverse because when I lived in communism under Ceausescu, he increased the population or the birth rate to about 4 million within a few years by careful social engineering plans. So it's not, instead of trying to preserve the genetic heritage of the population that lives there and doing things that will encourage them to get married and have babies and all of that, they're trying to bring 159 million people from countries that don't want to assimilate into that culture. They want to bring their culture to that country and their Sharia law to that country.
And here in America, diversity is praised. And so we're supposed to worship at the altar of diversity by bringing in caravans and of people from Mexico and Central America. And of course, in those caravans are people from other countries. I did a study on this at one time. It was documented that there were migrants coming in from 59 different countries into the United States of America. And so what's happening there then is we're told that we have to be willing to accept the fact that our country is going to be totally transformed into a different type of country. But I don't see how this is going to work with how are these people who do not speak our language, how do they assimilate into our economy and become educated in our country, other than the fact that now many areas, and you can explain this, and now we have to be able to provide different languages in schools. Some schools have to provide education in many languages, and we're told that speaking English is a racist type thing.
Well, yeah, because we don't have a national language or an official language, so to speak. I mean, people took for granted that English was the official language, but it isn't. It was never named so, again, thanks to all the liberals in this country. I just wanted to mention one more thing about this this plan is that this Herman Van Rompuy, who was president of the European Council in 2012, was awarded this Coudenhove-Kalergi Prize during a special conference in Vienna to celebrate 90 years of pan-European movement. Pan-European meaning this mass migration. And as I said, the prize is awarded every 2 years to leading personalities for their outstanding contribution to the process of European integration. And when you say European integration, they're just referring to globalization into a mishmash of people that don't have any kind of allegiance to anything, to any country or any history or anything from their past. But they don't expect all these flooding migrants that they bring from everywhere else to assimilate, because assimilation is a dirty word. And Mr. Van Rompuy said that the unification of Europe was a peace project. Well, if it's a peace project, why are you getting a military or talking about one? And why do you have all the upheaval in Europe and the rapes and the attacks and the burning of cars in Paris to such an extent that the president had promised them a big Christmas bonus in order to quell the burning in Paris? So in essence, buying peace, so to speak.
It's a bribe.
To bribe them, yes.
So, to kind of wrap all this up, let's go back to Diced again. And how can our viewers learn more about that? And tell me again, because I can't remember, DICED was...
Yes, there's a chapter in my book, the one that you have behind you. I don't know which chapter it is that, but DICED is the acronym, and it is the Draft International Covenant on Environment and Development. And I explain in my book, various articles to what they refer, but basically is absolute and total control of every aspect of a person's life or the way we do business.
Okay, I'll have to go back and reread that and then study it some more.
It's about 242 pages and 79 articles, and one of the articles refers specifically to the law of the sea treaty, passage through waters, using waters for exploration or fishing rights and all of that, which would fall under the aegis of the United Nations.
Okay, I recall that now. Now, if I were to just go on like one of these websites like Google, if I just typed in Diced, would that take me that information? Because I'm sure Google would love us to know all about this.
I'm not sure if we'll take you to that, but if you type in the Draft International Covenant on Environment and Development, you may get to the actual document.
Okay. And what we're really trying to do, Ileana and I are really trying to do with this series of interviews that we're doing on the UN Agenda 21, if people can see that with her book, is we want to educate the people to understand that this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not some pie in the sky thing. This is actually happening in the UN, which is located in New York City. And these people are very determined to implement this Agenda 21, which is now evolving into Agenda 2030 by the year 2030. And back in 2015, they came out with their 15-year plan, and every country will be audited on their progress of this, of their acceptance and their implementation of Agenda 21. And the United States is scheduled to be audited in 2019.
That's correct. And people, they call me conspiracy theorist in 2009 or 2010 when I started researching all this stuff. And I'm sure I had other friends I didn't know who were doing the same thing. But yeah, tinfoil hatter, conspiracy theorist, and yet the more I dug, the more documents I found, and it was all real. And the language seemed so benign, but it's really not benign at all. It just, United States, because we're such a large country, are probably the last ones standing in their way to complete all their United Nations plans at every level.
Yes, I agree. So thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom with us. And God bless you for all that you're doing for bringing, enlightening us in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, always. Okay, boys and girls, I'm back after a short break. And what I want you to do is read UN Agenda 21, Environmental Piracy, because what Ileana and I are trying to do is we're trying to bring all this information to you so you'll know what's happening to you. Now, maybe you won't be affected. If you're my age, you may not be affected so much by all this that's happening, but what about your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? What kind of world are they going to grow up and live in and try to survive in a country that is now not a country anymore, but it's just a United Nations that's governed by people from afar, and where we have no say for anything that we do. So please get the book and learn about it, and then start sharing this with other people so other people can learn about this. This is not conspiracy theory. This is going on today. And if you think about it, think about all the code words we hear about diversity and so forth. That's what's happening today. And while you're at it and you're reading, I'd like you also to read my book, because I'm really proud of my book and I'm really passionate about my recording, about my writings and my work. So God bless you all. God bless you for watching. God bless our active duty personnel. God bless our vets. And God bless America. And remember, where there is no vision, the people perish. And if America doesn't have a vision, the Americans will perish. So God save our America. We need you now more than ever before.